Think back to the very beginning of your life. Not kindergarten, not your first day of school. Earlier than that. Much earlier. Can you remember what it felt like to open your eyes for the very first time? To hear your mother's voice? To taste food for the first time? To struggle onto your feet? Or say, "Mom," for the very first time? Every single one of those moments happened. You lived them. You experienced them. They shaped who you would become. And yet, they're gone. Not blurry, not faded, just gone. It's as if the first 3 years of your life were cut out of the movie entirely. No scenes, no snapshots, nothing. Science actually has a name for this: infantile amnesia. For generations, the explanation sounded simple. Well, babies just don't have fully developed brains. The idea was that an infant's brain is like a brand new hard drive. It hasn't been set up yet. It isn't capable of storing memories. Simple, intuitive, completely wrong. Over the last few decades, neuroscience has uncovered something astonishing. Your infant brain wasn't failing. It wasn't lazy. It wasn't too immature to remember. Quite the opposite. It was working overtime. Imagine carrying around the most advanced camera ever built. One that records every flash of light, every familiar voice, every comforting touch, every frightening sound, without ever missing a frame. That's what your brain was doing. Those memories were real. They were encoded. For a time, they actually existed. So where did they go? Why can't you remember a single second of the most important years of your life? Did those memories simply decay? Were they overwritten? Or did something inside your own brain destroy them? Because hidden deep inside your brain, there's a mechanism. One so essential to becoming an intelligent adult that it may have erased the only record of your earliest self. Not by accident, but as part of the plan. Now, you might be thinking, hold on, babies can't even talk. How could scientists possibly know they remember anything? That's exactly the question researchers asked. And the answer came from one of the cleverest experiments in developmental psychology. Back in the 1980s, psychologist Carolyn Rovi Collier invited a group of babies, some only a few months old, into her lab. Each infant was placed gently in a crib. Above the crib hung a colorful mobile. One tiny ribbon connected the baby's ankle to the mobile overhead. At first, the babies kicked randomly, just ordinary, meaningless movements. But then, something unexpected happened. They discovered a pattern. Kick, and the mobile moved. Kick again, and it danced even more. Within minutes, those random kicks became intentional. The babies weren't just moving anymore. They were experimenting, testing a hypothesis, learning how the world worked. And once they figured it out, they couldn't stop. The crib turned into their very first laboratory. A few days later, the researchers brought the same babies back. The same room, the same crib, the same mobile. But this time, the ribbon was gone. Nothing connected their feet to the toy. Here's the question. What would you expect a 2-month-old baby to do? Start over from scratch? Kick randomly again? Forget everything? Instead, the moment they saw the mobile, they immediately began kicking as hard as they could, as if they already knew exactly what was supposed to happen. And that changed everything. Because it proved something scientists had long underestimated. Babies don't just learn. they remember. 2-month-old infants could retain that memory for days. 6-month-old infants could hold on to it for weeks. More importantly, they could retrieve it, not by chance, not by instinct, by memory. So now the mystery becomes even stranger. If babies can form memories, if they can store them, if they can retrieve them, then why can none of us remember being one? So now we have a paradox. Babies can learn. They can remember. They can even recall experiences days or sometimes weeks later. So why does every one of those memories disappear as we grow older? Where did they go? To answer that, we need to look inside the brain itself. Deep beneath the folds of your brain lies a small, curved structure. It almost looks like a tiny seahorse. That's exactly where its name comes from, the hippocampus. If your brain were a giant company, the hippocampus would be the memory department. Every conversation you had yesterday, every meal you ate, the smell of rain, the sound of your favorite song, every moment that feels like an experience passes through here first. The hippocampus takes those raw moments, packages them, compresses them, and turns them into something your brain can store. Think of it as creating a digital memory file. But making the file isn't enough. It still has to be archived. That's where another part of the brain comes in, the prefrontal cortex. If the hippocampus is your computer's desktop, the prefrontal cortex is the long-term hard drive. One creates the file, the other stores it for years, sometimes for a lifetime. But here's the problem. When you're an infant, that connection doesn't fully exist yet. Imagine trying to upload thousands of photos with an internet cable that hasn't even been plugged in. The camera works perfectly. The photos are real, but they never reach permanent storage. That's what an infant brain is dealing with. The hippocampus is working non-stop, encoding, packaging, recording. But the highway leading to long-term storage is still under construction. And one unfinished structure turns out to be especially important. It's called the dentate gyrus. You don't need to remember the name, just remember the job. Think of it as a major interchange on the brain's memory highway. Without it, traffic simply can't flow the way it should. In adults, information moves smoothly through this network. Experiences become lasting autobiographical memories. But in babies, that interchange is still being built. Its neural circuitry doesn't fully mature until roughly between the ages of 2 and 4, which means something remarkable. Your infant brain could absolutely create memories. It just couldn't move many of them into permanent storage. For decades, this seemed like the perfect explanation. Mystery solved. Babies remember things for a while. But because the memory system isn't fully connected yet, those memories never become permanent. Case closed. Except, science has a habit of making simple answers uncomfortable. Because the deeper neuroscientists looked, the less satisfying that explanation became. After all, those early memories clearly existed. Some lasted for weeks. Some could even be retrieved on command. If they were never stored, how could they survive for that long in the first place? Something wasn't adding up. And then researchers began asking a far more unsettling question. What if those memories weren't simply failing to survive? What if they were being destroyed? Not by disease, not by injury, but by the very process that allows your brain to grow smarter. Think about the first few years of your life. Learning language, learning faces, learning balance, learning emotions, learning how the entire world works. To do all of that, your brain wasn't sitting still. It was changing faster than it ever would again. And hidden inside that explosive growth, scientists believe they found the real culprit. Not a broken memory system, not an unfinished brain, but something far more surprising. A process so essential that without it, you could never become the person you are today. And yet, it may have erased the only record of the child you used to be. For years, scientists believed they had the answer. The memory system simply wasn't finished yet. The hardware was still under construction. End of story. It made sense until it didn't. Because the more neuroscientists investigated, the more one question refused to go away. If infant memories were never properly stored, why do babies remember them so well in the first place? Why can they retrieve them days or even weeks later? Something else had to be happening. Something far more dramatic. At the University of Toronto, neuroscientists Paul Franklin and Sheena Jocelyn proposed an idea that sounded almost impossible. What if the very process that makes your brain more intelligent is also the process that destroys your earliest memories? Not because your brain failed, but because it succeeded. Picture your brain during the first few years of life, not as a finished machine, but as the busiest construction site on Earth. Every single day, new roads are being paved, new neighborhoods are appearing, entire communication networks are coming online. Nothing stays the same for long, because everything is still being built. To learn language, to recognize faces, to walk, to understand emotions, to make sense of the world, your brain needs an enormous number of brand new neurons, and it manufactures them at an astonishing speed. This process has a name: neurogenesis. Neurogenesis isn't a bug. It's one of the greatest engineering achievements in biology. Without it, the brain you'd rely on for the next 80 years could never exist. Every new neuron is another piece of the network, another wire, another bridge, another possibility. Your future intelligence depends on it. But here's the catch. Your brain isn't infinitely expandable. There's only so much room inside the hippocampus. You can't keep adding new buildings forever without tearing some old ones down. Imagine trying to rebuild the center of a city while millions of people are still living there. Roads have to close, buildings have to be demolished, power lines have to be rerouted. It's messy, it's disruptive, but it's the only way the city can grow. Your brain faces the exact same problem. As waves of newly born neurons flood into the hippocampus, they don't politely wait for space to become available. They force their way into existing circuits. They compete for connections. They reroute communication pathways. And in the process, they begin dismantling the delicate neural architecture that was already there. Those fragile connections weren't empty. They were carrying something. Your earliest memories, the face that made you smile, the room where you learned to crawl, the warmth of being held, the first time sunlight poured across your eyes, the first time the world surprised you. All of it, encoded inside neural pathways that suddenly found themselves in the middle of a massive reconstruction project. Imagine saving thousands of photographs, only to renovate the entire filing system overnight. The pictures may still exist somewhere, but every folder has been moved, every label has changed, every shortcut has disappeared. The faster the renovation, the harder those memories become to reach. So maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. It's not that a baby's brain is too weak to remember. It's almost the exact opposite. It's too busy growing, too busy rewiring itself, too busy preparing you for everything that comes next. Your brain wasn't choosing between remembering your childhood or forgetting it. It was choosing between preserving the past or building your future. and evolution made its choice. Forgetfulness wasn't the mistake, it was the price. The price of language, the price of reasoning, the price of imagination, the price of becoming you. That's a difficult thought to accept, because it means every new connection your brain created may have required an older one to disappear. Every step toward adulthood came at the cost of the child who experienced it. So here's the heartbreaking question. If your childhood memories were bulldozed by your own developing brain, are they really gone forever? Or are they simply buried beneath everything that came after? For years, scientists believed they knew the answer. Then, in 2018, an experiment changed everything. At this point, the story seems almost unbearably sad. Your earliest memories, the first people you loved, the first joy you ever felt, the first time you laughed, the first sunrise you ever saw, all of it crushed beneath a brain that simply needed room to grow. It sounds final, permanent, irreversible. For decades, that's exactly what scientists believed. Those memories were gone, not hidden, not sleeping, gone. Then, in 2018, everything changed. Paul Franklin's research team decided to ask a dangerous question. What if we've been looking in the wrong place? What if the memories weren't erased at all? What if the problem wasn't the memories, but our ability to reach them? To find out, they designed an experiment that sounded more like science fiction than neuroscience. First, they worked with very young mice. Each mouse was placed inside a small chamber. Then came a tiny, harmlessly mild electric shock. Just enough to create a fear memory. Nothing more. Before long, the young mice learned exactly what that box meant. Whenever they were placed inside it, they froze. The memory was there. Clear, reliable, easy to observe. Then the scientists waited. The mice grew older. Their brains passed through the same explosive wave of neurogenesis that human infants experience. New neurons, new connections, massive rewiring. Exactly the process that was supposed to wipe those early memories away. Finally, the adult mice were placed back into the same chamber. And nothing happened. They wandered around calmly, sniffed the corners, explored the box as if they'd never seen it before. No fear, no hesitation, no freezing. From the outside, it looked obvious. The memory had been erased. Case closed. Except the experiment wasn't over. Not even close. Because the researchers had prepared something extraordinary. They turned to a technology called optogenetics. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. It sounds almost impossible. Because, in a way, it is. Scientists genetically modified a specific group of neurons, the very neurons that had stored those early memories. Those neurons were engineered to produce a light-sensitive protein. Think of it as installing a hidden switch inside the memory itself. But unlike an ordinary switch, this one could only be activated by light. Not electricity, not chemicals. Light. Then came the moment. The researchers aimed a tiny blue laser directly into the hippocampus. Not randomly, precisely. Exactly where those childhood memories had originally been encoded. They turned on the light. Instantly, the adult mouse froze, completely still. The fear was back. Not gradually, not after learning again. Immediately, as though the memory had never disappeared. as though someone had simply unlocked a door. Think about what that means. For years, the mouse behaved as if the memory no longer existed. But the moment scientists bypassed the brain's normal retrieval system, the memory came flooding back. The experience had survived, hidden, silent, waiting. The memory wasn't deleted. The brain had simply lost the path leading to it. That's a very different idea. Imagine opening your computer one morning and discovering every family photo has vanished. You search every folder. Nothing. You panic. You assume the files are gone forever. Then someone opens the command terminal, types a single line, and suddenly every photograph reappears. The files never left the hard drive. Only the shortcut disappeared. That's what these experiments suggest may happen inside your own brain. Your earliest memories may still exist, buried beneath layers upon layers of new neural wiring. Not erased, not destroyed, just disconnected. Your first laugh, your mother's face, the warmth of being carried, the overwhelming brightness of your first encounters with sunlight. They may all still be there, locked inside neural circuits that your conscious mind can no longer reach. Like priceless recordings sealed inside a vault, whose key was lost decades ago. And if that's true, then perhaps the saddest part of infantile amnesia isn't that your childhood disappeared. It's that your brain remembers, but you no longer know how to ask. Up to this point, everything we've talked about has been biology. Immature neural circuits, the hippocampus, neurogenesis, hidden memories, lost retrieval pathways. It's a compelling story. But it still leaves one question unanswered. Even if your brain could somehow hand those early memories back to you, would they actually feel like your memories? Or would they feel like watching the life of a complete stranger? To answer that, we have to leave neuroscience for a moment and step into psychology. Because memory isn't just about storing experiences. It's about knowing who those experiences happened to. Think about your earliest memory, whatever it is. Maybe blowing out birthday candles, maybe getting lost in a supermarket, maybe falling off a bicycle. The details don't really matter. What matters is something much deeper. In every one of those memories, you're the main character. You don't remember life as an outside observer. You remember it from behind your own eyes. There's an unmistakable sense of, that happened to me. Psychologists have a name for memories like these: autobiographical memories. They're more than recordings of the past. They're chapters in the story you tell yourself about who you are. And here's the part that's easy to miss. To build an autobiographical memory, you first need an autobiography. You need a self. That sounds obvious. Of course you have a self. You know your name. You know your face. You know where your life begins and where everyone else's ends. But here's the unsettling question. Did the one-year-old version of you know any of that? Or was the world simply happening? Developmental psychologists have spent decades trying to answer exactly that question. One of the most famous experiments is almost unbelievably simple. It's called the Rouge test. A researcher secretly places a tiny dot of red makeup on a baby's nose. Then the child is carried in front of a mirror. Now watch carefully. Babies younger than about 18 months usually smile, wave, giggle. Some even reach toward the reflection, as though another baby is looking back at them. Because to them, That's exactly what it is. Another baby, not themselves. Then, somewhere between 18 and 24 months, everything changes. A toddler looks into the mirror, pauses, frowns, and instead of touching the reflection, they reach for their own nose. Not the mirror, their nose. It lasts only a second, but in that second, something extraordinary happens. For the first time, they recognize the person in the mirror as me. A self has emerged. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for the brain to begin organizing experiences around a central character. Enough for life to become your story. Now think about the timing. The emergence of self-awareness and the appearance of our earliest lasting memories happen at almost exactly the same stage of development. That's probably not a coincidence. Maybe the reason you can't remember your first years isn't simply because the memories were difficult to store. Maybe it's because there was no narrator yet. No one to connect scattered moments into a coherent life story. The sights were there, the sounds were there, the emotions were there, but there wasn't yet an I to gather them together and say, "This happened to me." Imagine trying to write a biography before the main character has even been introduced. Every event exists, but none of it belongs to anyone. Not yet. And there's one more missing piece: language. Before children learn to speak, their world is an explosion of raw sensation. Bright light, warm skin, cold air, hunger, comfort, fear, countless experiences, but almost none of them have names. Without words, those experiences remain isolated, unlabeled, unorganized. Imagine trying to save thousands of computer files without giving any of them file names. Everything exists, but finding it again becomes almost impossible. Language doesn't create memory, it organizes it. It gives experience a structure, a sequence, a beginning, a middle, an end. It transforms sensations into stories. And that transformation may explain another fascinating discovery. Psychologists at Cornell University notice that people's earliest memories aren't the same across cultures. In communities like the Maori of New Zealand, where children grow up surrounded by family storytelling and personal narratives, people often remember events from as early as 2.5 years old. In many East Asian cultures, where conversations tend to focus less on individual experiences and personal emotions, those first memories often don't appear until around the age of 4. The biology is the same. The brain is the same. But the stories we learn to tell change the memories we carry with us. Because language isn't just a way to describe memories, it's the container that allows many of them to survive. Maybe memories were never meant to stand alone. Maybe they need 4 things to endure. A bra. Now, let's put every piece of the puzzle together. For years, scientists searched for a single explanation for infantile amnesia. There wasn't one. There were several, and they all happened at the same time. The hippocampus was still maturing. The pathways to long-term storage were incomplete. The dentate gyrus hadn't finished wiring itself. Then came an explosion of neurogenesis, restructuring the very circuits that held your earliest experiences. At the same time, you didn't yet have the language to organize those experiences into stories. And perhaps most importantly, you hadn't fully discovered the person those stories belonged to. Every part of the system was changing. Every connection was being rewritten. Every layer of your mind was under construction. It wasn't one failure. It was 4 different transformations, all happening at once. And that leads to a question that's surprisingly difficult to answer. Look at an old photograph of yourself as a baby. You're wrapped in someone's arms, looking out at a world you've never seen before. That child has your face, your DNA, your heartbeat. But ask yourself something. If you have no memory of being that child, if the neural circuits that encoded those experiences have been dismantled and rebuilt, if there was not yet a fully formed sense of I, then in what sense is that baby still you? Or was that someone else? Someone who lived inside this body for only a few extraordinary years before quietly disappearing so that someone new could take their place. It sounds unsettling, maybe even impossible. But in philosophy, this question has existed for centuries. How much can something change before it becomes something else entirely? Your body changes, your cells are replaced, your memories fade, your personality evolves. And yet, you still wake up each morning believing you're the same person you were yesterday. Maybe identity was never about keeping every piece. Maybe it's about maintaining the thread that connects them, even when most of the fabric has been rewoven. Many people think infantile amnesia is evidence that evolution made a mistake, that the brain is flawed, that it somehow failed to preserve the most precious years of our lives. But what if we've been looking at it backwards? What if forgetting wasn't the flaw, but the design? Your brain wasn't neglecting those first years. It was dedicating itself to something even more important, growing relentlessly, every hour, every day, building the architecture that would one day let you speak, reason, imagine, love, create, dream. It knew something you couldn't possibly know. There wasn't enough room to become who you would be without letting go of who you had been. To grow new branches, old roots sometimes have to give way. To build a stronger network, older pathways must be rewritten. Not because they were unimportant, but because they made everything else possible. Perhaps the greatest sacrifice your brain ever made was one you'll never remember. It gave up the only version of you who experienced the world without language, without identity, without expectations. The child who stared at sunlight as though it were magic, who heard every sound as if it had never existed before, who discovered an entire universe, one moment at a time. That child didn't fail to survive. That child became the foundation of someone else, of you. Maybe that's the real story behind infantile amnesia. Your earliest self didn't vanish because your brain was weak. It vanished because your brain was brave enough to change. Because sometimes, the only way to build a mind capable of remembering a lifetime is to let go of the life that came first. So no, the first 3 years of your life were never empty. They were simply spent building the person who's listening to these words right now. The baby in those old photographs didn't leave you with memories. They left you with something far more valuable. They left you your mind. And perhaps that's why you'll never remember meeting the youngest version of yourself. Because by the time you were finally able to remember, they were already gone.